In a hospital corridor, a man shivers in tattered clothes. People pass by, indifferent, but that night, one person stops. A nurse, a stranger, a question, "Are you okay?" Then, something happens that will change their lives. A week later, an envelope is slipped under Anna's door. Inside, a note, and the beginning of a secret. An act of kindness returns without delay. But in this story, nothing is as it seems. Sometimes, a small act of kindness can change a life forever. Don't miss this story. Please subscribe my channel and like the video. Thank you. It was a cold autumn evening. The wind howled, shaking the windows of St. Mercy Hospital, creating a melody that seemed to echo through the air. The sharpness of the cold seemed to bite into the streets, making a few pedestrians shiver, while the dim light of the street lamps cast a sad curtain over the city's silhouette as it gazed back with tired eyes. Inside, Anna Carter was nearing the end of her long and exhausting shift. Her tired eyes scanned the last few entries on the computer screen, and she took a deep breath, trying to push away the weight she was feeling inside. She had been feeling exhausted to her bones for days. The mounting medical bills from her mother and the student loans weighing heavily on her shoulders were like a constant reminder of the burden she carried. But despite all of this, she had never lost the compassion she felt inside. Even when she was exhausted, she always made it her duty to treat her patients with the same care and kindness. After finishing the last entry and tidying up her desk, she grabbed her bag and headed for the exit. But as she was about to step outside through the hospital's glass doors, a movement caught the corner of her eye. Just by the entrance, a man was standing in the corner, helplessly huddled against the wind. His clothes were worn and torn, his shoes were full of holes, and he was shivering in the cold. His face was covered with the marks of time and hardship. Most people passed by without even giving him a second glance as they walked through the hospital doors. Even if someone noticed him, they only saw a regular homeless person trying to escape the cold, and they turned away indifferently. But Anna was different. Despite her own exhaustion and the worries spinning in her mind, she couldn't remain indifferent to the scene before her. Adjusting her bag on her shoulder, she took a step toward the man. With a warm smile on her face, she gently bent down. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked softly. "Do you need medical help?" The man slowly lifted his head. His eyes were filled with the emptiness of someone who hadn't slept for days and was utterly exhausted. His lips were cracked, and his hands were blue from the cold. He looked at Anna for a few seconds, then spoke in a quiet, shaky voice. I don't know," he said almost in a whisper. "I'm just so tired." Anna saw the helplessness in his eyes. This wasn't just physical exhaustion. There was a deep, soul-crushing tiredness that came from years of hardship. Something stirred deeply within her. Leaving without helping him was never even a thought in her mind. Without hesitation, Anna bent down to him and gently took his arm to help him up. The man's body wobbled slightly, but Anna carefully supported him and guided him toward the warm corridors of the hospital. A few colleagues nearby watched them with questioning looks. Some furrowed their brows, while others turned away and continued on their way. But Anna, ignoring the thoughts of others, kept moving forward. To her, there was no right time or place for kindness, it simply needed to be done. She seated the man in an empty chair in the hospital's break area and quickly grabbed a blanket, wrapping it around his shoulders. Then she handed him a cup of hot tea. His hands shook as he reached for the cup, trying to adjust to the warmth of it, taking a deep breath as he did. "I'll check your vital signs," Anna said softly. The man tilted his head slightly, giving her permission. When Anna placed the stethoscope on his chest, the irregular and weak heartbeat she heard made her worry. She furrowed her brow but tried to hide her concern. The man seemed to notice this and carefully studied her face. "You need fluids and rest," Anna said as she removed the stethoscope. "Did you eat today?" The man shrugged slightly, avoiding her gaze. Then he shook his head. "Not really," he mumbled. Anna sighed deeply. She was struggling with financial issues herself, but knowing the man was hungry and cold made it impossible to do nothing. She reached into her pocket, took the last few dollars she had, and headed to the vending machine. After buying a sandwich and a pack of crackers, she returned to the man and handed them to him. "It's not much, but it should help a little," she said softly. The man hesitated for a moment, then gratefully accepted the sandwich. He gripped the cup with both hands, then lifted his eyes to Anna and asked, "Why are you helping me?" Most people wouldn't even bother to look at me. Anna smiled faintly and shrugged. Because kindness shouldn't depend on the circumstances, she said sincerely. Everyone deserves a little compassion. The man grew quiet. Her words felt like an echo of something he hadn't heard in years. As he held onto the warmth of the cup, he saw the sincerity in Anna's eyes. The world could be harsh and unforgiving, but maybe, just maybe, there was still room for kindness in it. The man's lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but the words were stuck in his throat. He could only manage a quiet, "Thank you." Anna nodded with a slight smile on her face. The gratitude in his eyes was perhaps a reflection of a kindness that no one had shown him in a long time. That night, as she left the hospital, her thoughts were still with him. But the next morning, the man was gone. Anna searched for him inside the hospital, checked the records, even asked security, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had never been there at all, disappearing without leaving a trace. She felt an inexplicable sense of disappointment. Had she imagined the warmth in his eyes? Had she only envisioned the quiet dignity beneath his worn exterior in her mind? Weeks passed. The man's face remained a faint memory in the back of Anna's mind. But the glimmer of hope that had come with him slowly faded. Life went on, as it always had, maybe even a little harder. Her mother's condition had worsened. Every day, while working at the hospital, Anna did everything she could to help her patients heal, but at home, she felt helpless in the face of her mother's declining health. The bills kept piling up. Late at night, she would sit and go over her accounts, the numbers dancing in front of her eyes, the reality of it all becoming a heavier burden. The only solution she could find was to take on more shifts. Sometimes, she worked for days without rest, trying to stay awake with coffee. By the time she got home, she would collapse into her small bed, exhausted. How much longer could she keep going? Sometimes, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, she would ask herself that question. But she didn't know the answer. The only thing she was sure of was that she had to keep going. That night, as Anna returned home, exhausted and drained, the cold wind lashed at her face like a sharp knife. She had been running around the hospital all day, trying to stay awake with just a few hours of sleep. All she wanted was to get inside, lie down in her bed, and close her eyes. But as she approached the door, she noticed an envelope on the ground. Bending down, she picked it up. There was no name or return address on the envelope, just her name, typed on the front, Anna Carter. A strange feeling settled inside her. She noticed her hands trembling slightly, though she couldn't tell if it was from exhaustion or some vague expectation. Taking a deep breath, she turned the key and entered her apartment. As soon as the door shut behind her, she headed toward the kitchen. She dropped her bag onto a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. For a moment, she considered whether or not to open the envelope. Who would send her an anonymous letter? But her curiosity quickly outweighed her hesitation. She carefully ripped open the envelope and pulled out a piece of paper. Her eyes widened. Inside the envelope, perfectly folded, was a bank check. A check for $50,000. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears. In shock, she turned the check over, but there was no additional information. Just a small note beside it. For your mother's treatment. Thank you for your kindness. A friend. Her fingers gripped the edges of the paper tightly. As her mind tried to process the information, her heart was pounding so wildly it felt like it might burst from her chest. Who could have done this? Her mind raced back in time, listing possibilities, weighing the chances. And then, an image etched itself into her mind. Those brown eyes. The man huddled in the cold entrance of the hospital, worn but hiding a quiet dignity. The man who had thanked her with a shaky voice and looked at her with gratitude. Could it have been him? Really? Anna took a deep breath. She couldn't stop her heart from racing. If it really was him, who was he? And why had he done this? But one thing was certain. Once, she had done a small act of kindness. And now, that kindness had turned into a miracle. Anna studied the check in her hand for a moment longer. She needed to think, but she couldn't. The only feeling inside her was hopeless relief. All this time, she had been struggling for her mother, not knowing what to do anymore. The debts, sleepless nights, helplessness. Now, like a miracle, a solution was laid before her. She didn't know who it was from, but there was no time to question it. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and contacted a private clinic. She started the necessary procedures to get her mother admitted to the hospital and receive the best treatment. For the first time, she felt a real sense of hope. Now, she could do something for her mother. The next morning, she took her mother to the private clinic. The hospital staff greeted them warmly. When her mother was settled into a clean bed, Anna took a deep breath, feeling a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. The doctors began conducting detailed tests. They said they would accelerate the treatment process. She was no longer alone. For a while, she sat in the corner of the room, looking at her mother's face. She had fallen into a deep sleep, her face more peaceful. The weight she had carried for so long was slowly beginning to lift. But still, one question kept turning in her mind. Who had done this? And why? Since the day Anna had received the envelope, she had been able to breathe a little easier. Her mother's treatment was progressing, and the doctors were saying promising things. But there was still one question that kept spinning in her mind. Who had done this? Then, one day, she found an elegant invitation in her mail. It was for a grand charity gala organized by the city's most prominent business people. The most surprising part of the invitation was that the ticket had been paid for by an anonymous donor. Anna held the card in her hands for a while, a strange hesitation filling her. Could this be related to her? If it had been the man she had seen at the hospital entrance that night, why would he send such an invitation? Could it really be him? Or was it just a coincidence? Hours passed as she struggled with indecision. Finally, she looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. When was the last time she had done something for herself? She had always worked, always thought of others, always fought. Maybe for one night, just one night, it could be different. She sent a message to her friend asking to borrow a nice dress. Soon, she found a long, simple yet elegant evening gown that fit perfectly. She carefully styled her hair, applied light makeup, and for the first time in a long while, felt like a woman again. When she arrived at the grand hotel where the event was being held, she was briefly stunned by the sparkling atmosphere inside. Crystal chandeliers glittered, and elegant decorations adorned the tables. The city's most important figures, dressed in expensive clothes, sipped champagne, smiled, and engaged in important conversations. It was a place far removed from her world. As she quietly stood in a corner, trying to adjust to her surroundings, the host took the microphone on stage and began speaking. Tonight, we will honor a person who has changed many lives with a significant donation. Let's welcome to the stage Alexander Hayes. Anna's heart started to race. And then, he stepped onto the stage. With a confident posture, assured steps, and a charismatic presence that captured the attention of everyone in the room, the man appeared. In his impeccable tuxedo, he looked strong and impressive. But Anna recognized him immediately. It was the man from the hospital. The worn clothes, the trembling body in the street, the battered shoes. All of it was gone. The man in front of her now exuded an air of nobility, and his face held an unusual seriousness. That man was Alexander Hayes. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She placed her hand over her chest and took a small step back. How could this be possible? Everyone in the hall was listening intently to the man speaking on stage. Alexander Hayes, with his confident posture, gripped the microphone tightly and scanned the crowd with his eyes. He began by explaining where the donations collected that night would go. I am proud to announce that the donations raised tonight will be used to build a modern hospital for children fighting cancer. A soft round of applause rose from the audience. Anna, still holding her breath, watched him. She was trying to make sense of what was happening. Alexander continued speaking. This hospital will not only provide medical treatment, but will also be a beacon of hope for sick children and their families. And that's why we wanted to give this hospital a special name. Alexander paused for a brief moment on stage. As the audience waited eagerly for his next words, his eyes seemed to search for someone in the crowd. Finally, after taking a deep breath, he completed his sentence. The name of this hospital will be Anna Carter Cancer Fighting Hospital. There was a brief silence in the hall before applause erupted, but Anna's ears began to ring. What? Her eyes widened, and her breath became irregular. Was this a joke? But Alexander continued, his voice strong yet emotional. That day, I was spending time with the workers in the basement of my company. I wanted to understand their conditions better and see how I could help. I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. That day, I became exhausted, dizzy, and started feeling unwell. I decided to go to the hospital, but on my way, I fainted. A soft murmur spread through the hall. Alexander paused for a moment, then smiled. When I opened my eyes, Anna was by my side. She helped me. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't judge me by my clothes. She didn't belittle me. She simply treated me the way a person should be treated. She reminded me what humanity is. Anna's eyes filled with tears. She gently placed her hands over her mouth, her heart racing. Was this real? Alexander continued, looking directly at her. In that moment, I understood how powerful selfless kindness could be. Anna was just trying to help a person without caring about who they were or what she would get in return. That's why I want this hospital to carry her name. Because this building will give people hope, just like Anna gave me. As the applause echoed in her ears, Anna couldn't hold back her tears. She had never imagined that such a small act of kindness could create such a huge impact. Alexander, meanwhile, was looking at her from the stage. With a genuine smile, there was a brief moment of silence in the hall, a stillness that seemed to stretch between the echoes of Alexander's words and the distant hum of the crowd. Anna, with tears welling in her eyes, was still trying to grasp what had just unfolded. The world around her, the grand ballroom, the elegant guests, the hushed whispers felt like a blur, as if she were standing at the edge of a dream. The shock and emotion in her heart made the applause and murmurs feel distant, as if they belonged to another reality entirely. Just minutes ago, she had been just another guest, another tired nurse, struggling to make sense of her life. And now, Alexander, the same man she had once helped on a stormy night, had changed everything with a few heartfelt words. Then he moved. Alexander stepped down from the stage, his expression steady, his every step sure and deliberate. The crowd around him instinctively parted, as if sensing the weight of the moment, as if understanding that something far more significant than wealth or philanthropy was unfolding before their eyes. Yet, through it all, Alexander's gaze never wavered. His eyes were fixed solely on Anna. With each step he took, her heart pounded louder. When he finally stood before her, there was no hesitation, no grand pretense. Only sincerity. "This wasn't the only way I could thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of something deeper than gratitude. "I want to get to know you better, Anna. You're the only person who saw me for who I am, not for what I have, not for what I can offer. And in return, I want to be there for you. I want to spend time with you, understand you." Anna's breath hitched. The intensity in his voice, the honesty in his words, it was unlike anything she had ever known. Everything had happened so quickly. Just a few weeks ago, she had felt like she was drowning, buried under the weight of exhaustion, debt, and the constant worry for her mother's health. Her life had been a cycle of long shifts and sleepless nights, a blur of responsibilities that left little room for anything else. She had never expected a twist of fate, never imagined that a simple act of kindness could ripple outward, reaching back to her in ways she couldn't have foreseen. And yet, here she was. A part of her wanted to ask why me? But she already knew the answer. Because she had been the one to look past appearances. Because she had offered help with no expectation of anything in return. Because, in a moment where the rest of the world had turned away, she had stopped, she had cared. And now, her life had shifted in a way she had never anticipated. But what would happen next? That, she didn't know. What she did know, what she could feel, deep in her heart, was that for the first time in a long while, she was truly seen. The weight of that realization filled her with something unexpected. Hope. She met Alexander's gaze, and in that moment, the uncertainty, the overwhelming emotions, the sheer unpredictability of it all didn't seem so frightening. Instead, there was something warm, something steady, something that told her that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face everything alone anymore. A small, tentative smile formed on her lips, her eyes softening with something that had been missing for far too long: trust. "I want to get to know you too, Alexander." It was a simple sentence, yet it carried the weight of a promise, the unspoken understanding that this was the beginning of something new, something real. Alexander exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath, waiting for her response. And then, slowly, a smile touched his lips, one that wasn't just relief, but something deeper, something filled with anticipation. This wasn't just about repaying a debt. This wasn't charity. This was two people, stepping into the unknown together, bound not by wealth or circumstance, but by something far rarer. And as the murmurs of the ballroom faded around them, as the evening stretched forward with all its unanswered questions and endless possibilities, Anna realized something. Sometimes, life changed in an instant. And sometimes, one choice, one moment of kindness, could be the beginning of a story neither person had ever imagined. Over time, the bond between Anna and Alexander grew stronger, woven together not by grand gestures, but by the quiet moments they shared. They met frequently, sometimes over simple coffee shop conversations, sometimes during long walks through the city, and sometimes in the peaceful quiet of a hospital room where Anna worked tirelessly to help those in need. Each meeting, each exchange of words and glances, deepened their understanding of one another. Despite coming from vastly different worlds, they soon realized that their greatest values aligned: compassion, humanity, and a desire to make a difference in the lives of others. Anna, who had spent years sacrificing her own comfort to care for her ailing mother, saw how wealth and status had never blinded Alexander to the struggles of ordinary people. He may have been born into privilege, but he was not ruled by it. Instead, he used it as a tool for change. Alexander, on the other hand, saw that Anna was not only strong but also incredibly selfless. She had spent her life putting others before herself, offering kindness even when she had little to give. He noticed the exhaustion in her eyes after long shifts at the hospital, the way her hands trembled when she counted out the last few bills from her wallet to help someone in need. Yet, through it all, she never wavered. She never let the weight of the world harden her heart. It was in the little things that Alexander truly came to understand her: how she always took a moment to talk to the elderly patients who had no visitors, how she instinctively reached for his hand when she saw someone struggling, how she found joy in the smallest acts of kindness. The things that seemed insignificant to him, like leaving an extra tip for a struggling waitress or remembering a hospital janitor's name, were gestures that held immense meaning for Anna. Through her, he learned that true wealth wasn't measured in numbers, but in the lives one touched. Anna, in turn, discovered that Alexander was not just a man of wealth, but a man of profound sincerity. Beneath his composed exterior was someone deeply sensitive, someone who had lost faith in the goodness of people but had chosen to search for it nonetheless. He was valuable not for his riches, but for the choices he made, how he used his resources not to flaunt power, but to create change. Most importantly, he was someone who valued her, not as a fleeting interest or a passing charity case, but as a person with her own dreams, struggles, and convictions. He saw her in a way no one else ever had. As time passed, their connection blossomed into something neither of them had expected. What had started as a fleeting encounter on a stormy night grew into a partnership fueled by understanding and respect. Alexander found himself inspired by Anna's relentless determination, and Anna, for the first time in a long while, found someone who made her feel safe, someone who not only wanted to take care of her, but also believed in her strength. Eventually, their shared values turned into a shared mission. The money Alexander had once used to test humanity was now being invested in a way that truly mattered toward building something lasting, something that would change lives. Together, they founded a program to provide free medical care for those in need, ensuring that no one would be turned away from treatment simply because they couldn't afford it. Anna's hospital, which had once been a place of overworked staff and overwhelmed patients, became a beacon of hope, offering care without discrimination. Months had passed. Since the day Anna and Alexander stepped into each other's lives, they had built countless memories together. Alexander had taken a step back from his flashy world and gotten to know Anna's simple yet meaningful life. Anna, in turn, had discovered the real person behind Alexander's wealth: his kindness, loyalty, and the compassion hidden deep within him. One evening, as the golden sunset bathed the sky, Alexander gently took Anna's hand. There was a warm sense of security between their fingers. His eyes looked at her with a clarity that contained nothing but love. "Anna, I'm certain now," he said in a low, sincere voice. "I've never met anyone like you in my life, and I don't want to be without you. Will you share your life with me?" Anna's breath caught in her throat. In that moment, she felt the truth of it. Everything they had been through, their lives intertwining, their understanding of each other. It was all leading to this moment. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, there was no fear or uncertainty. The answer in her heart was clearer than anything else. She smiled and nodded slightly. Yes, Alexander. A warm smile appeared on Alexander's face. In that moment, nothing else in the world mattered. And so, the story that had started with a simple act of kindness had turned into true love. An act of kindness can sometimes change a life forever. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new stories.